now a younger generation. I think people under 25 that applied for the military were denied because they're overweight. The obesity thing, how does that happen? It came in through the mouth. There's a lot of resistance to labeling. So as much as we look in the ingredients, there's a level below which, granted it's like, well, it's so low it's not going to be a problem, that we don't have to know about. Plastics. The guy was right. It is killing us. We were the spirit of America. We're going to make it all work, for ourselves. We were mega in debt. 2008 came along.
Not in generations has Wall Street absorbed the number of body blows it took today.
The American financial system is rocked to its foundation as top Wall Street institutions topple under a mountain of debt.
Each day you wake up to a progressively more stressful situation. When it finally hit me, it was like my gut stopped. I get my colonoscopy and they say, you not only have ulcerative colitis, you have Crohn's disease, and it's the worst we've ever seen. I have time, roughly about 90 days, to figure this out, to get out of this box, because I'm not going with more drugs. I am not going to get sucked down into the death funnel. And that's what you start to see. It's like my hands are sliding down the sides, and I realize, throw away what you thought you knew, start again with real basic stuff. Now on to the ketogenic diet. And why the ketogenic diet? Well, we were hunter-gatherers up until at least 10,000 years ago. That's 190,000 years, which means primarily we ate animals. But the dirty little secret about the ketogenic diet, it works for less than 50% of the people.
How is uric acid associated with early death?
That's a big question.
This interview with Dr. Goldkamp was the deepest conversation I've had about longevity on this channel. I had to watch this interview twice to understand the big picture of why we're getting heart disease, cancer, and dying early. And I'm making 3 changes to my life, and I'm sure that you'll do the same. Let's get into the episode. Dr. Goldkamp, now I have watched so many of your videos right here on this YouTube channel. I pretty much watch every single one of them. And it seems like the biggest cause of early death is dementia, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And the interesting thing is, probably about 10 years ago, we've probably had about 100 times improvement in technology, but we haven't had the same improvement in our health. It seems that we're getting sicker. Can you explain why that is?
If I'm getting the low-hanging fruit, simple answer, it's clearly our diet. And it's not so much that we're not getting the nutrition. It's because we have all these other things that are put in the food that don't have to be put in the label. So in the United States, we have an ongoing argument about labeling, and there's a lot of resistance to labeling. So as much as we look in the ingredients, there's a level below which, granted it's like, well, it's so low, it's not going to be a problem, that we don't have to know about. So it's in the food, not in terms of hyponutrition. It doesn't have the nutrition that meat or plants had. And that's a whole topical in the United States, maybe worldwide. So there's that. So that would be that's the obvious answer. Then to that you add environmental toxicities, whether it's the phthalates or the heavy metals or the bisphenol phosphates or plastics and so on. We've never been here before. For anybody who watched The Graduate, a movie in my generation, the line was, plastics. The guy was right. It is killing us. And so, and there's been a number of studies on that. So now the problem is the economy is run by marketing, and you need to sell stuff, and they sell stuff. So that means the onus is on personal discretion. You now know that plastic is bad. What are you going to do about it? You now know that heavy metals are bad. Well, that's a little more sinister. They don't pop up. But there's some things you can act on, obviously. Other things are less so. But when it comes to the food, if you're reaching for a donut and you haven't questioned that, whole grain or not, if they even make whole grain donuts, I don't know. That's not on my diet list. Then you have to think about that. So the quality of food clearly is number 1. The stuff they put in it is number 2. Number 3 is environmental toxins.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the big word diet, and we're going to talk more about what is the diet that's going to increase our lifespan. But I know for you personally, Dr. Goldkamp, you went through such a traumatic experience in just 6 months. And this was about 10 years ago. Can you walk us through what happened that you nearly died from what happened to you?
Yeah, I would say, so one word is stress. So where that stress came from. We were in practice for, a good 10 years. Worked for another group. We started our own practice, bought a building. Oh, they rented, did real well, bought a big building. We were mega in debt, and the model there was you now own the real estate. You now have other rooms to hire out to other therapists, a very, basement and all this other stuff. And going forward, when you choose to retire, there you go. You sell it all, and that's your retirement. 2008 came along, and that was a big downturn. People weren't even paying their copays, which is a thing in this. It's like not even paying your copay. Um, and naturopaths in the state of Connecticut, now I'm talking, don't really get a lot of remuneration. They don't get a lot of, the insurance doesn't cover much. It's unlike, but they don't know that. So we had a full practice. Then 2008 came along, and that was concurrent with, and it's always a delayed effect. And we finally actually went through bankruptcy at 2012, which is whenever everything starts to fall apart. I had a brother die of multiple myeloma at 2012. It took a decade to get there. Mother died just before that. So a lot of things tended to come right down at the same place. So that was the stress. So what does stress mean? Stress means you're producing a lot of cortisol. You are not allowing your body to repair. And a chronic high stress, not acute. It's not like you almost got hit by a bus and you step back. That's acute. Chronic is each day you wake up to a progressively more stressful situation. You just haven't learned to shake it off. You can't shake it off because the reality is right in front of you, and there's all these other triggers. It could have been, for others, it's a bad relationship, it's abuse, it's a bad job, so on and so forth. So eventually, it all hit the fan. Concurrent. So my wife was doing two jobs. She had a whole full-time job, but she was also my front desk. She was a database analyst for a whole nother company, and she was checking people in and out. And we were the spirit of America. We're gonna make it all work, for ourselves. Had the education, and lucky enough to buy the buildings and so on and so forth. And so how stress affected her. Weekends we were painting and knocking down walls, and it was all like, hey, can do the American dream. So she developed meningioma, which is basically it's a space occupying lesion. So depending where that is, it's going to hurt the nearby structure. So she had it right up next to her pituitary, between her two, they call it optic chiasm. So she ended up, fast forward for her, she did actually have a 13-hour brain surgery. She did lose the vision in one eye, so she's monocular now. And me went from, when it finally hit me, it was like my gut stopped. There was no having a bowel movement. It's like, well, how long can that stop for? Obviously cuts the appetite. And so now I go by to a nearby MD. I said, I really like to get scoped by colonoscopy. And there was a long line for that. So anyways, I got in there, see the guy, and I get my colonoscopy, and they say, you not only have ulcerative colitis, you have Crohn's disease, and it's the worst we've ever seen here. And how we do that is now we're putting you on steroids. And at that point, here's a big miss of conventional medicine. I mean, he had a racket. He was making lots of money. Talk about it. He owned, it was a big building. He did really well, and he got the racket down and wheel you in, so on and so forth. But wait a minute, this guy got to me now. This guy got to his state by stress, and you're giving a steroid, which is a stress hormone. So wouldn't that compound the situation that you're trying to resolve? So obviously that didn't work, and unfortunately that drove me into an anemia. In other words, it did compound it. It opened up my gut even more, so now I'm leaking blood. You get that through well, you can see it in the stool, but through a hemocult. So now I'm leaking blood, and my anemia goes down to how you measure anemia. The volume of your blood is, call it 45. That's a percent. All right, that's just a number. It's roughly the equivalent of 9 cups of blood. 9 cups. So as you lose your cups of blood, I was down to 2 cups of blood. That is so little blood that it's almost inoperable. That is so little blood that no longer could I go upstairs. That we had a 2-story house. I would have to lie down flat on the living room and just to sort of breathe. I was now down on a per breath basis, supposedly under doctor's guidance. And if I dare take a hot bath, The heat, it would take me hours to resolve from heat for the, because what happens when your blood reduces in volume, your heart has to speed up. It's like buses. If you have fewer buses, but you have equally number of kids to pick up for school, you got to whip these buses around faster, right? So the two buses got to work a lot faster. So your heart is still like, you now have a resting heartbeat, what they call tachycardia. It's just not getting better. So found another doctor, got 4 transfusions, still got other meds. They're putting me on other meds that were, anyway, bad. So I'm thinking, I got to get out of this. So I got my transfusions. I got a breath. My blood pressure went down. I wasn't quite up to 45. I was like in the high 30s, but it was a big. So I go, I have time, roughly about 90 days, to figure this out, to get out of this box, because I'm not going with more drugs. You had to give yourself needles, and you had to sign waivers. This, possibly carcinogenic, of course, all these things. So with that, my first step was what they call, well, then it was called fecal microbiota transplant. Now it's just called FT, fecal transplants. And an article in the New York Times caught me. It was like saying, hey, it was kind of a joke article. Hey, this weird lady's doing this thing, and said, so I go, I'm going to find out about this. And it goes back, the history of it, like everything else. You start your research on that. And then you find out who your donors are, or where do you go. So I went to 2 conferences. I went to University of Chicago, international. Suddenly I'm now, and of course I had emailed these people ahead of time, and the center, as you know, is Australia for the Dr. Thomas, what was his last name? It's not Brodeur. It's pronounced a different way, but he's in Sydney, and he has by far the most. Anyway, so I'd emailed him and got to meet him at the University of Chicago, and we talked at length. He gave a good talk, but we got talking, and he's profound, absolutely profound. And because of the scope of practice and however they can do it in Sydney, I don't know anything about the insurance or anything else. He had masses of people and now he has a big institute, and he's well deserved. So I started there, started talking to others. But in the United States, you get the doctor from University of Pennsylvania, the doctor from Stanford, and saying, this is bad. You just can't be going out and doing FMT on your own. We're working on it. We're trying to make a bank, a stool bank, so you can use it from us. So you could see the agenda there. And then on the day of that conference, there was an article that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine about how somebody tried it themselves and had a terrible outcome. And you could just sort of, but yet you go talk to the doctors in Canada when you broke for lunch or whatever else, or from, especially Belgium was runner-up to Australia, but a far second. And extraordinary papers. They were using it in Panama. They were using it for treating autism. They were using it for diabetes in Belgium. This is now, 13. So it's about, it is 10 years ago. And it was like, oh my gosh, and so so I go, all right, so what are we going to do? So I used my wife and I set it up for 3 months, and this is what we're going to do. We had to get our process down and so on and so forth. She had never been on antibiotics since, I don't know, 15, so she was clean in that regard. She was a minimalist in terms of, I don't think she ever took any medications at all, but even in supplementation. So that's what we did, and that was kind of like, hey, how are you going to make that work? So anyways, that goes, and that puts you on a, and now I felt, all right, I'm not going to fall apart when my blood that I was given is going to be filtered out of the body. All blood lasts for 120 days, roughly 90. I'm now to the point that I'm holding my blood. I'm not leaking as much as I was before, right? So now on to the ketogenic diet. And why the ketogenic diet? It's, in a word, the 3 ketones, ketone bodies, but primarily beta-hydroxybutyrate, is a great gut anti-inflammatory. And it's also a great stimulant for the mind, and it goes a lot of things in terms of why, the keto, or however we describe it now, but having a moderate ketosis, which is eating fewer carbs, of course, really helps with ketones in the brain. And Dr. Mary Newport, saw her present a number of times. She worked with her husband who had Alzheimer's, and that was a very profound presentation. And then Stephen Kinane beyond that. and they sort of work together, I think. But just now I realized I hadn't heard of any of these things. So I was way off. Now I realized I tried not to be cynical. It's too easy to be cynical in life, but it's like, and I think maybe every doctor asks this, maybe not. It's like, so why weren't these topics explored? Why wasn't the ketogenic diet explored in naturopathic medical school at Bastyr? I think they had their agenda. I think every medical school has their agenda. And there's still this sort of silent war going on. And, it's kind of expressed in the media now, who gets censored, who doesn't get censored. So I let that go. And so the ketogenic diet really has been refined, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years. Yeah, it was pediatric epilepsy. It was, drop the carbs, fat burn, get the ketones, look what happens. And that was the genesis of the Charlie Foundation. And thank God, his father is the director of all those various movies, said, we're going to focus on this. And he opened up, he cracked it open in the mid 90s to bring back the diet. And so now it's gone beyond that with Volek and Finney and so on, and Virta Health. And that's good. I don't think that's the end of the story, though. I think that was showing a truth. When you have such a big change, arguably it was over 100 years old now when Russell Wilder came up with the ketogenic diet at the Mayo Clinic. Now we have a lot more ways of looking at not only our blood, we have the CGM, continual glucose monitor, which anybody and everybody can get, and there's now a lot of different companies that do that. That is very, very valuable. And so, yeah, you have your ketometer and, you can measure your ketones. I think that's actually less important. I think you got to measure your glucose first, that's the thing that drives through. But anyway, so it was so much the fear of death. It was kind of a determination. And it was sort of an echo of my brother's death and so on. He died of multiple myeloma, and he was the head of criminal justice for Temple University. And he was one of the brightest people I ever knew, and kind of a super athlete as well. But anyway, it's just like, I am not going to get sucked down into the death funnel. And that's what you start to see. It's like my hands are sliding down the sides, and I realized, throw away what you thought you knew, start again with real basic stuff. And we did. And didn't get into labs for, back into now. I mean, this is my thing. I would say for a good 5 years or so. It was the FMT, it was ketogenic diet. It was started podcast interviewing, as much as I was interviewing, I was after me. I was like, I want to get what they know and strip it away from the marketing part. And so I got a good foundation with understanding and saying it's profound. And, it led into PSMF, protein sparing modified fast. Why is that relevant? And certainly led way into looking at evolution, and going back and let's make sense of this. Everything has to have an origin, and so the trite jingoisms or the marketing sayings of, oh, just do this and it'll be better, that's seldom true. I mean, it's got an optimistic sort of ring to it, but there's work we each need to do. One is to assess. So now I'm at a hyper assessment. I don't think I'm that hyper, actually. I'm a basic assessor.
You're pretty detailed.
Detailed, right. I mean, the reason I hesitated there is because when you go see other naturopathic doctors, they have all these specialized panels to go off, and it's like, we're going to chase, what kind of plastic you may or may not have been exposed to before we look at the stuff in front. I'm not saying that's irrelevant. I'm thinking that's a tweaking. That's somebody trying to specialize. Anyway, so now I look at, we got to know our labs. And that's what the doctors did in the 50s and 60s. They had their little tablets, and they did longhand spreadsheets. And Mrs. Brown had these, and da-da-da-da. And so they felt responsible for their population and saying, well, in my population, the male or female doctor would say, in my population, this is what we're seeing. But no, you go to a conference, you get people talking about other research, which is not theirs. So their cleverness is they did the work to go through, well, now it's the internet, but let's say before that, they did the work, praiseworthy, to put these studies together, but they're a doctor that's seeing patients, and you want to go, okay, what's your data? Are you seeing this? And they'll go, yeah. No, what do you mean, yeah? I mean, show us, but it never happened. So it's more or less a conference is a Reader's Digest version of other people's work that was probably presented with a particular agenda. So it filters through. And so now I go, all right, I can be agenda free. And this is what the doctors were in the 50s. They were agenda free in the 60s, maybe even the 70s. And that's why there was kind of a clean conversation. That's why they earned the respect of their patients. Now it's everybody is suspicious of their doctor. He said I should do what? Why? And it's hard to engage, so that's
It's hard to engage. It's hard to know. I hear this a lot on the YouTube comments. I hear this a lot when I speak to people in the carnivore community, which I have. They don't know what to do or where to start because we're hearing so many different things of different ways that we want to cure disease, whether it be heart disease, cancer, or dementia, or diabetes, insulin resistance, obesity, metabolic syndrome. There's all these things that we want to cure. And the thing is, how do we start? So I think that you are so perfect, Dr. Goldkamp, to actually understand this, getting to the labs or the root cause. What I wanted to do is to do a bit of a funnel approach, which is let's start at the top because you clearly mentioned diet and ketogenic diet. And because you had your inflammatory conditions on the verge of death, you reversed that with a fecal transplant or fecal transplants and a ketogenic diet. Let's first start there and talk about some other things to increase lifespan, to reduce the risk of getting chronic disease, ketogenic diet, or diet in general. What are your thoughts on the ketogenic diet to increase lifespan and to avoid these chronic diseases that are just ever increasing?
I think that on that level of can we do one size fits all is a good generalization if we all made this migration to doing this thing. So let's say, so the classic ketogenic diet came out is less than 20 carbs. So you actually grams of carbs per day. And now we have things like chronometers so people can find out what their carbs are per day. So the first thing, easy thing is go to Chronometer. It's free. Yes, they'll have some ads in there. Pay $5, get rid of the ads. And I don't really care about Chronometer, but it's a thing that I use. Find your tracking. And now you have a piece of information. How many carbs per day am I actually having? Whether it's the donut or whether it comes in through the green leafy vegetables. So there's different kinds. There's good and bad. But anyway, how many are you having? That would be something. So that's really what the first piece of the ketogenic diet did. It said, we have to cut these carbs down because they drive glucose. And can we have glucose at a certain level and not, and that's what they're trying. And the ketogenic diet came out of fasting, up until, there's a fasting craze from the 1890s to really up into the ketogenic diet in the 1920s. Upton Sinclair wrote about it, and Mark Twain was into it. And so, but the problem with fasting is fasting eventually leads to death if you don't stop. So they're saying, talk about a popular idea that needs no, support. Just don't eat anything. For how long? Well, it was about 3 weeks is what they said. Do a 3-week fast, water fast, and so on. And of course, things got better. But the thing that they were trying to treat was diabetes, and mostly it was type 1 diabetics. These that, are basically born with inability or low ability to produce insulin. And so they lived longer, but what a miserable life. They were going to die faster because they didn't have insulin. So now you took that away because you gave no reason for insulin. You dropped the glucose. They're not eating anything. They're burning fat. So they are making ketones. And so, but eventually they die. So you gave them kind of a protracted, miserable life. And then in 24, 25, you had insulin that was isolated and used. And that was profound, So in that cauldron of what are the basic variables at almost a superficial way of looking at diet, it had nothing to do with nutrition other than macros, right? And they're very clear about you needed X amount of protein. They were focusing on kids, so pediatric epilepsy, and they knew if too little protein is going to stunt growth in many aspects. So their biggest concern was, well, how much protein do we do? And I think they started lower, but that was so from when William Wilder came out with it until a guy named Pennington, sort of his colleague, but I think the guy who really did the heavy lifting and developing a protocol that everybody can do, was really about 5 years later, as we read it up in a paper and so on. And so that's what they decided. I think was it 25? I forgot what the ratio was back then, but that's what took so long was the protein amount. So they go, all right, so where's the fat part? We can count the carbs. Even then, how would they count carbs? That was back when Mayo Clinic had its own kitchen. I mean, there was a testing kitchen in Mayo. I don't think it was called the clinic yet, of the brothers.
Before we continue with the interview, I just want to thank the sponsor of this video, Element. Now, when I first started carnivore 4 years ago, I was eating protein and fat, and I thought I was feeling okay, but I really wasn't. I had tiredness, fatigue, I couldn't sleep at night, and I thought maybe it was the salt. So I added some salt to my meals, I put some in my water, but it wasn't enough. Those side effects were still there until I tried Element, because you see, Element contains the right amount of sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And I think my body really needed that to feel normal. And especially if you're going from a carbohydrate diet to a zero or a low carb diet, your body is losing electrolytes. So you might need a supplement just to help you feel normal again. And the great thing about Element, it doesn't have any sugars. There is no nasties. And I like to use this raw unflavored option because I don't really tolerate sweeteners. But if you do, there are so many great flavors that Element has to offer. And right now, Element is offering this free sample pack on every order. So you're going to get 8 single servings of Element to try for free on every order. So if you want this, all you have to do is go to drinkelement.com/5-minute body. That's DRINKLMNT.com/5-minute body to get this sample pack. Let's just get back to the episode.
Food is real important. I mean, can you imagine there's a disorder, really going to be linked to everything, that they're going to focus on diet? How old-fashioned, you know? Once the medications came in, they lost that, and the story goes on. But anyway, that hit on a truth that was huge. From fasting to ketogenic diet was saying, hey, we can't just go fasting to death. What's the mechanism here? Ends up the ketones are very anti-inflammatory. They feed the brain. So now pivot to the way my mind works. It's like, well, how can this truth be relevant for the last 200,000 years? How does that make sense? Well, we were hunter-gatherers up until at least 10,000 years ago. And so 200,000 minus up till 10,000, that's 190,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers, which means primarily we ate animals. We ate animals. And they weren't fatty. If you ever had game, you go, where's the fat? In the United States, so venison's, or buffalo is very lean. So it's actually a pretty lean diet. But so they had their protein, they had some fats, and there's not a lot of evidence that there was a lot of vegetables they ate. In fact, 10,000 years ago, when that sort of agrarian revolution started, it was with the grains, and the grains got, they were smart enough people to, make it sort of more potent of all the different grains that were there. But they didn't have heads of cabbage, they didn't have, gorgeous fruits. They had figs and so on. So just enough. And so you go, all right, I buy that. Then you can get into the paleo diet, echoes that with Lorraine Cordain, and his looking at that. He sort of ascertained that sort of truth with that kind of thing. So now you go a little further. If we can check into this new truth that echoes a truth, then we're going, hey, I think we're pretty good. I think we're pretty good, because when we think we have a new little thing that hasn't really ever existed before, then we're into trouble. Hence all the medicines and so on and so forth. They've never existed. Why would they work? For a little bit, maybe, long-term, disastrous. So anyway, so the ketogenic diet came forward to that and really opened up the idea, and back to worked with Dr. Westman, and certainly through the conferences I went to, you realize the ketogenic, it was told to me this way, and I'll leave it anonymous because I don't want any of the Hebrew gurus and make it seem like I'm making them feel bad. But the dirty little secret about the ketogenic diet, it works for less than 50% of the people. And you go, how is it less than, so the answer to that was, well, they're not doing it right. And so I already saw how it works, and Dr. Westman actually is kind of the legacy of Atkins diet. He's the first to do the research on that. And so I don't think it was about that. I don't, it's like, so there's 50% of the population, they're going to try, and we're being told they're either lazy or unintelligent and they can't do it. I don't buy that. I don't they have the same evolution as we do. And so obviously what they're eating needs to be addressed, but if they could drop it down to 20 carbs or under, they would get some success. Why can't they? Now you get into things like addiction. Now you get into things like what has changed in their life, stress levels, and these other things that flourish in a high carb world. So it gets to be still more interesting, and therefore I look at things like cortisol and so on, and where does that part come into their life? As a little bit of a segue, one of the people that came to me, and I am not trying to have a book of business here. I enjoy the research and people coming in the panels I do, and glad they can buy them all because it gives me data. She was the head of a financial firm, a stockbroker's firm. So she was the office manager that, made it so they stayed in line and did all the work, and it was a highly stressful job. And she was, I don't know, maybe 100 pounds overweight. She's in her 40s, early 50s, had children, she already had her children and they were kind of graduated and so on. And so the thing for her, and she's really, her diet was, she really counted her carbs and so on and so forth, and went to other doctors, and I go, well, let's go see what your cortisol is. It's like, she was like, first of all, about to burn out. She had high cortisol, and you could tell that, and that's producing sugar. You don't have to eat sugar to make glucose. So she was on her own factory. So yeah, when we went to find out where did her glucose come from, where did her insulin rise from, it wasn't from what she ate. It is because she was making her glucose. So her stress makes glucose, because that's the energy to go run and run away from whatever the fear is, right? The bear is chasing us through the wood kind of thing, woods. So she's her own glucose factory that fits right into that whole thing. So there's two ways to get into high glucose, and dropping the carbs works for a lot of people. We'll say less than 50%. But if you now teach, ascertain, identify, and get the people to not be in chronic stress, which is a big issue, it's a societal issue, you're going to get major improvement. And so then you sort of say, all right, these are the things we need to go, and let's have real food. Let's not do packaged foods. That's gone. That's a foregone conclusion. If you rip open any package, I'm done. It's not going to work. We're going to have to go back to junior high school home ec and learn how to fry an egg.
So are you saying then, if we're talking about increasing lifespan, living longer, so on one hand, the theory is good in terms of do keto, do carnivore, but you're saying that from an adherence point of view, people actually doing the diet, it's very poor.
Yes, I am. As I
Okay.
say, it's a dirty little secret. So whether you call
Well, it's not
Finney
really
or
that
call
dirty. I think
Ulrich,
many people know that.
that's why the dirty little secret. And after that, I go, I appreciate, but to flip that, they go, but we got, Verta Health. I mean, go back to they were the first to do a large study. So kudos to them. And, why was the fallout? But they said, we went from diabetics, they could help diabetes, and that's the whole thing. They can, and they do. But the work that's required, and also if somebody's a diabetic for 30 years versus just got diagnosed, the rate of repairing mitochondria, so on and so forth, is going to be a long time. So to flip it, they'd say, well, we've gone from, I don't know, 4 or 5% to nearly 50%, whereas you flip it around saying, well, on the one size fits all, 100 people go into this room and do the same thing, 50% are going to come back out and say, that sucks. I wasted my time. I got no benefit. Why was that? Why was that? And then you have to look at what are the obstacles in their life. So cortisol is another one. The quality and addiction is so if they've been, to be rather simple, if they've been a donut person in their life, meaning all the refined carbs, you can't just turn that around. They have so elevated certain receptors, depressed other receptors. It's just such a hot button. It's a little bit like cocaine, and dairy feeds into that for various reasons. And
So it's not as easy as telling people just to do carnivore or keto and then, oh, you just fix and you're not going to get any chronic diseases. There's a whole host of other things that we have to think about if you want to cure disease. And I think because you work with patients, that's why you really understand what they're going through. And then that's why you go to the labs. We're going to get there in terms of the labs because I know that you want to talk about labs and numbers and you love all that stuff. Can you, for people watching, give an idea if it's not a certain diet that might be the best, is there certain foods that you think that people should even prioritize? Eat more of this, eat less of this, if they want to reduce their risk of disease?
Well, I would say the center in terms of foods, it's got to be around protein. And I think that the difference between animal protein and plant protein is not that big of a difference. You can get the the solution there, however you want to come at it. However, you're not going to get the other nutrients that come in with the animals, and organ meats when I'm talking about animals. They come with the plants. And let me tell you, I spent my education was through the plant side of this. Naturopathics are primarily plant-based. I think plant-based medicine, meaning the things you get from the flowers and the herbs and the roots and so on and so forth, like Chinese medicine, which is also part of my background, is profound. But that's not food, that's medicine. You know, you don't eat your medicine for nutrition. So what do I mean? When you were to make various teas or topical or extractions and so on and so forth, those are things meant to treat a disease, and that's how plants have primarily been used. Extraordinarily so. In Chinese, I spent 4 years Chinese herbal medicine, and it's just amazing at how they look at this, but they don't eat a formula for their nutrition. They eat a formula to correct a disorder, how would they say it? So, in terms of the foods, now we're talking about a macro protein, and I favor animal proteins by a lot because I can get more in liver. This is not like lots of liver, it's just a little liver on a regular basis, and egg yolks. And talk about egg yolks. Egg yolk has got to be the first and only processed food. You reached into the nest and you took this egg. It was already made. It's processed because something made it for us, right? Something made for it. We reached in, he goes, it's done? Yeah, it's done. All you got to do is just crack it open and take it raw, cook it, however your thing is. But in the egg itself, the yolk is really the big winner. I mean, they're both good. And you can go into how our chickens raised and so on and so forth. And it certainly is better if they don't get the soy and the corn because of the omega-6. But back then, in the last 200,000 years ago, the first process, I say it kiddingly, the first processed food was reaching in and taking out, the egg and going, I got an egg. Look at the nutrition I got on that. Profound. So egg yolks and liver, both animals, it's a lot of work to have a vegetarian or vegan aspect to supply all these things. And once you start being into plant-based, you got to look at the glucose levels, and so we're talking about one lab, everybody should know the word glucose and they should follow it. And then after that, they're going to learn about insulin. And then after that, we're talking, and so few words, cheap labs, profound revelation in terms of its application to you and where you are at that point in your life. And that's really what it comes down to. So yeah, that food around, I believe, me, and it's mostly what I have so far this morning. I had, we have generally 4 burgers at night. I put one aside because that's going to be my breakfast. Then Judy makes some turkey burgers. Why turkey? They're leaner, and she's more concerned about the fat level, but they're gorgeous. And so I'm done primarily until dinner. But on the burgers, we have the basil that we make, the basil and the pesto that we make. There's oil in that. We have jalapeno stuff, that we've put aside. How old-fashioned. I mean, it doesn't take up our whole life, but we love it. And it doesn't have all the crap. There's no labeling problem there. When you put them by, put them by meaning you can them correctly and you put them in your shelf and you open, or you put it in the refrigerator. It's gorgeous. I love it. I mean, people ask, what's the biggest thing going on in your life right now? I remember I got a haircut a while ago. So what are you going to do today? I go, we're having steak tonight.
So is it right to say that you're mostly carnivore?
They would call that carnivore, and the reason I back away from that, I mean, I would say yes. I find carnivore is really only a word you can use for cats, cat family. It's a contrivance. It's a contrivance to superimpose on humans because now it's like this program. And I think we know where we got to start. I don't really mind, but I would say I work backwards from the amount of meat that I meat, whether it's fish. When I say meat, whether it's fish, poultry, it's all meat, meaning it's not plant. And that's the single most important thing. And so the fat that come in with that is my fat, which is primarily a lot of it's saturated fats. And to connect all this, you can't talk about ketones and ketosis without talking about saturated fats. Saturated fats are just, no double bonds, triple bonds. They're just one long slippery line, and they get simply bigger by the number. C8 is 8 carbons, C4, which is really what a ketone is. So they take caprylic acid, they cut it in half. Where do you get caprylic acid? Caprylic acid comes from those saturated fats, but that has always been there. So in those 200,000 years, so when I check it in mentally, does this make sense for the last 200,000 years ago? It's like, yeah, it was saturated fats was a primarily fat we had. What do we get from fish? We got the omegas. And so the difference is the saturated fats are, it's the most concentrated in saturated fats as a family. It's the highest amount of fat in our body. So if I was to take your blood and go, look at all these different saturated fats, it's kind of an energy source. They do a lot of other, nothing is just one thing. But the omegas, which means that they have a number of double bonds various times, so they're kind of kinked up. They are structure. They're structure for cells, so they provide different purposes. Olive oil is like what they call monounsaturated. I mean, it's got one kink in it, and the fish oils, depending on how the omega-3s, they have 3 and sometimes the 5, and so they are to wrap around things. They are nerves. They are, so it makes kind of perfect sense. And so now we have 2 more things we can measure. I don't measure saturated fats. It's a unnecessary labs, and I try to be somewhat frugal. But omega-6 to omega-3, and when you're talking about omega-6, which is, you got to go back to the 50s, you got to go back to the early 60s, Ansel Keys and so on and so forth. He said, hey, it's all about cholesterol and heart disease. And so the truthful part of him then was that he lived at the time of Eisenhower, who had 4 heart attacks in office. So suddenly it became a crisis in the United States. Oh my gosh, why are we having all these heart attacks? They didn't look at that he smoked cigarettes and everything else, but oh my gosh. And it was set off on the cholesterol thing. And so whether it was a lie or misinformation, in the seven study, he did this called a 7-country study, and he basically pulled out 7 countries out of 24 to kind of represent his whole Mediterranean thing. And so there was a guy named Dr. Ramsden who went back to look at the studies back then, and he had to go back to one was in Australia, in Sydney, so it's a Sydney diet heart study, concurrent with, overlapped a couple of years, with, I forgot what the other one was, in Wisconsin, and he had to find the sons of the main researcher. He said, oh, the data's still in the garage. It's like tucked in boxes. So he got it all and had to cajole these people. He goes through it and he said, these conclusions of the 50s and 60s were bogus. If anything, and the idea was, if you have omega-6, this is omega-6, if you have vegetable oil, that's going to push the cholesterol down away. We will drop our cholesterol. He was right. So Ansel Keys was right. It dropped the cholesterol, but it increased death rates. So in his idea that, hey, vegetable oil will do that, it did do that. And omega-6 is a natural, it comes from plants, corn and soy, in this country anyway. And the Sydney Diet Heart Study did it with safflower oil, which is even a higher percentage of omega-6. And they came up with the same sort of, like, when you really looked at the data, it's like, this isn't good. So it's not that it's unnatural, it's just that it's becoming so overwhelming. It's a ratio that's pushed out the omega-3s. Where would you get the omega-3s? We tend to say it's fish oil. Well, you can get some omega-3s through all the meat you eat as well. The best sources are fish. But if we were to pretend back in the day that we didn't even think about grass-fed or not grass-fed, now it's become such an elitist thing. Oh, it's grass-fed. Oh, good for you. It's that they were all grass-fed, which means they ate the grass, they didn't eat the grains. Let's be real. They ate the grass, they didn't eat the grains. The omega-6 is in the grains. So if you had a field of grains that were still at the grass level and they grazed it, it'd be fine. If they came back and they ate all the grains, now it's soy and corn, but it could have been wheat and sorghum and all this other stuff. So it's the timing difference. It's the grass eating, no grains, versus the grains. And so now it's corn and soy, which are very, amped up in omega-6, and so we've changed their diet, and it shows up, and we get it. That's a problem, because we can't just say grass-fed is good for everybody, because where are they going to get it? There are places, and it is expensive, and we're buying our first pig. It's not going to be buying a butchered pig and putting it in a freezer to take care of our own food sources. But it's not a perfect, it wasn't grass-fed. Or here at Eastern Carolina, but it's a step, and now we'll work on others. Can we get a better pig or a better cow? The way they used to do it. So it is a problem to look at the omega-6 and omega-3 ratio. It's no longer that we're just eating processed foods, but we can now say that I guess you could say that the beef and the lamb and everything else is more processed. If you know that I think lamb and sheep don't, I think they graze on grass, they don't do on grain, so I think they're the least culpable, but you can find that out. Um, and and that ratio has changed so dramatically that it's problematic. It's not just as pro-inflammatory, it's just that all those places that the omega-3s are supposed to be, and now you have a slightly different ratio, it makes for problems, whether it's the red blood cell or the nerve cell, and we're going to see it throughout. So we have to kind of reverse that slowly.
So, if we're thinking about diet and we're thinking about all the things that you just said, which is omega 3s, omega 6s, we need cholesterol, we need to eat more of the meats, eat more fish, eat the yolks, eat some liver, although some people don't love liver. How do we do this in real life? Like, have the best quality meats, the best quality fish, which is not farmed raised, and all. Like, even I have that question, being animal based, or if you want to call it carnivore, for the last 4 years, how are you meant to do it as a normal person?
I'm a normal person. I do it, and we don't do grass
You
fed.
are a
I
normal
would like
person,
it.
sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I agree. No, it isn't that it was. Um, I would like to have grass fed, but it's not available. So I'd say that sometimes the word perfect gets in the way, and that's because you said it. It's like a lot of people do that. It's like start where they are, and what part can they improve? And I think so. My prejudice is not so much on the protein level, but on the overall nutrient level. You get a bigger bang for your buck with a little bit of liver and egg yolks, and people go, "Oh, I don't like liver." Well, you got to look at that. You just said, I'd rather do poor health versus liking liver. How about we go back to junior high school and do it, not that we cooked liver in junior high school, but we had home ec and we knew how to make it. So we make, also, let me reframe the liver thing is like, a lot of people love pate. Let's have some pate, put it on our crackers and so on and so forth. We got crackers, but pate is liver. And, you know, you learn how to make pate if that's what you want, and that's what we do. We do a big bowl of it, and it hangs around for a week or two. Then we don't do it for a while. So you make it because it has to be part of your life. So by saying we don't want to do that, well, you can always do liver pills. You can go online, get supplements with liver pills, and they're there. So that's another way. But it's got to be there. So I say liver more than all organ meats because people don't do spleen and thymus and kidney. It's a non-starter. They certainly don't do brain anymore for a lot of reasons. So we're kind of stuck with what you can do, and is in your grocery store, is liver. And it's not just the B vitamins, it's a lot of stuff. And so it just has to be part of it. So we're now part of this legacy of the 200,000 years and saying, oh, I don't like that stuff they did before. It didn't work for me. It's like, all right, then you're going to have a problem. So some things we got to make it work. What did your parents say? I don't know, when you made your bed. I don't really care. You're going to do it. You're going to make it work. Or whatever the thing is they had to do. Clean the dishes, put the silverware away.
Because even I have a hesitance towards liver, and I can understand people out there. It's just like, really? Yes, you have to do it if you want good health. We're going to start having some liver or liver capsules or anything that we can do, because I understand where you're coming from. It's the nutrients that we need, because whether it be you want to live longer, increase your lifespan, reduce your risk of early death, really what you're looking for is nutrient density, and whatever you get which is rich in nutrients, whether it be endogenous or exogenous, in or out, that's what the human wants. Um, let's move on from diet, because we know about kind of diet and ketogenic diet, carnivore diet. As much as people can stick to it, it's good, and you prioritize nutrient dense foods, the egg yolks, the liver, meat, animal based. I want to move into, apart from diet, what is the second most important factor that people need to consider to increase their lifespan?
Well, I'd say you look at deficiencies. So this is a measurable thing. That's what I look at. You have to look at deficiencies. And now we've moved away from the macros, right? Ketogenic, the protein, and so on and so forth. Now you look at, do we have deficiencies? Because deficiencies are road stops. The road's broken. We can't go there anymore. So why don't we repair it so we can go there? Is it a neurological thing? Is it a gut thing? So it makes sense to at least look at that. Nothing's perfect. We don't have it perfect, but I use SpectraCell. I'm sure there's labs around the world that do that. I match that with labs, and so I at least have that. And I also see their diet. So I mean, at least this is how do I bring in somebody if am I going to make a transformation here? What are they eating? And I need to have them now do chronometer, and they'll go on and do that for about 4 weeks. And I don't tell them anything about anything. I just sort of see, be true and be honest. I need to look at that. We'll change it later. So I get to have a correlation, right? Not just the lab. So I get to look at, and chronometer has gotten progressively more sophisticated over the last 10 years for sure. And it will show you, deficiencies or not. And so you get a clue there. So you can address that. That's a big deal. The other thing, which is esoteric, is that we don't all have the same needs. That's just the way it is. And that came out of, as we mentioned before, we were talking of primarily having to deal with malaria over the last 200,000 years, certain genomic strategies. So for me, I have compromises both in choline metabolism and in methylation, not just MTHFR, but in the constellation things. So I go, needs to be, what does that mean? That what it means is I basically need more of the B vitamins. So if there was 100 people in the room and I'm the only one that had this particular greater need, when we're not getting our B vitamins, I'm going to be the first person to get sick. I'm going to be the first person to show up with things that are, we'll call it B vitamin deficiencies, which are anything from carbohydrate metabolism to cerebral balance. So I will be the first one. And it's not because we're eating differently. It's because we had a slightly different need. And it's strong enough to be a real factor to needs to be addressed. So you say, all right, we have the food. We've said, hey, these are the foods you need to eat for this, like most people, but you need a little more of it. And then you would probably supplement the difference for a while to gradually get them up that hopefully only diet would happen. But they'll probably, like I take supplements. I don't take a lot because I don't like supplements for the most part. They have a need. So they're there. So it is about deficiency. So, it's about nutrition, nutrient density. Yep, all those good things. But we got to measure it at some point because it's the assumptions we make end up being, it happens in my family too. I mean, my siblings and so on. Yeah, I got a good diet. It means they don't want to go there. So usually there's something there. There's something they don't want to disclose. And it's like, then something's not going to work out. But if you can look at that, or sense it, it goes as far as using chronometer. There again, it's a free thing. Yeah, it takes work. There's kind of another word we're working around. It's engaging in oneself, and you'll say, all right, according to chronometer, I'm not saying it's gospel. I'm just saying it's clever. It will say I'm not getting enough. Well, maybe you ought to pay attention to that. I know you don't know about genomes, but go on that. At least that's an improvement. So putting the two together are a big deal. In as much as 20 years ago, I was lecturing at a couple of years in a row at UMass College of Pharmacy. They're all post-grad pharmacy students, so they're pharmacists. And methylation and the need for folic acid and B12 and all these little things were just coming about. And nobody knew a lot other than there were certain correlations with B12 deficiency and certain genomes were higher in schizophrenics. So and then one of my videos, I talked about the Dutch hunger winter and end of World War II. They had, they were basically starved. A huge population of people are starved. So who went crazy first? Who died? And because they were so disciplined community, everything got documented. People still went to the doctors as they were starving. So they got to see all this documentation of what starvation looks like. But why didn't they all show up with the same symptoms? Why was it only and then in subsequent generations? Now you go to the whole epigenetics thing. So it has to be addressed. We don't want to do that, right? Just like there's people who don't like liver. Don't like liver then. Find a way to make it work. That's all I can say. You were humans, and to turn on your ancestors and saying, I'm a weenie now because I can be a weenie because they said I can do whatever I want to do. It's like there's a lot of risk there that's not being advertised.
Okay, I have to ask. So I know that I mean, you're being very realistic because I know that people want to change their health. They want to not have these diseases that people are. I mean, I'm pretty sure that each person knows somebody that either has Alzheimer's, they have dementia, heart disease, brain disease. Probably most people know somebody that has that. So they want something to prevent it. When they go see a doctor, is there certain labs that they can order or ask for?
Yeah, there are. I think that, and so that's in some of the videos I do. I try to say, hey, this is just about labs. Spend your $10, ask for this lab, or I'm sure Australia has the same, in Europe, though I don't know the references there. So here's what you can get for free. Go do it yourself. You're going to have somebody go draw your blood. So you go to one of these bazillion places, probably in your neighborhood, and get your blood draw done. And so, yeah, I would absolutely. So, for under $50, you can get a lot of good information. Glucose, insulin, done. Triglycerides, HDL, done. We're not even up to $20 yet, I don't think. After that, oh, the omega-6 3. What's the cost of that? I think that's probably about $60. This is now through Quest and Quest or LabCorp, the places in the United States. So you get that. That's an extraordinarily useful piece of information. So we're under $100. You go, I got this stuff and it gives me a range. I'm not quite sure how to read it. Well, these ratios are really helpful. And I had to start there too. So before my crisis, before saying I got to look deeper, I'm missing something obvious. This can't be that magical or evil. There got to be something that I'm doing that I need to know about. Um, what's my thought? It's like, so I went in to compare, now that I have enough people, I can compare relative to age and other things. But I was only a tweaker before by saying, well, here's the range. Yeah, you're within range. Don't worry about it. That doesn't always, you can be within range and still have problems that's why you have to look at a context. So the easiest context were insulin, glucose, context of two, right? And then you have triglycerides and HDL, context of two. And you can even put these together and they will tell you about insulin resistance. They will tell you about chances of heart disease. Then you throw in your omega-6 3, which gives you even more information. You have a lot of stuff covered. No, we didn't go into liver panel or didn't do electrolytes, didn't know any of this other stuff, but you got it for under $100. You had to, and boom, easy to do on that, and then so even way back when I started meeting patients in the 90s, I say you got to get a notebook, print it out, put it in your notebook. Here are June 6th, whatever year, so you can look through and you are reading the book of your life, so to say, but you're getting more familiar with these labs. So I know we all got to roll our eyes when we see a lab, we roll our eyes when we see a little chemistry, but hold on for a little better because this is our only way out of there, out of this. In the United States, was it 2 weeks ago? Was it a third of all now a younger generation? I think people under 25 that applied for the military were denied because they're overweight. Excuse me? I would say if not more than a quarter, less than a third, but that was pretty much national news, or if you get your YouTube news or email news, however you get notified, that's profound, but it's also sort of obvious. The obesity thing, how does that happen? It came in through the mouth. It didn't come in through anyplace else. So what you thought was eating safe, but it wasn't what your grandparents ate. You didn't ask. You thought these are smart people making this up. It's echo of the cigarette industry. Why do we think that was safe? And they don't. And we didn't smoke forever. How far back can you go smoking? Maybe 100 years?
So I'm curious about this. It's mostly about what you eat. But then you also talk about in your YouTube videos the importance of muscle mass and how muscle mass is directly related to mortality. So your risk of all cause death, for death of any cause, is directly associated with how much muscle you have. First question is, because people are just like, I'll do the exercise, but I don't want to worry about the diet. So what's more important, what you eat or the muscle mass?
Given that, if it's a finite choice, I would say it's the muscle mass. And Yeah. No, right. I mean, obviously you need both, right? You stop eating, you die. You stop working out, you minimally can get around, but you will age a lot faster. So that brings us to yet another lab, which is a whole new series of things that I'm coming out with. It's on a thing called IGF, which is, now we're back, it's called insulin growth factor dash 1, and there's some numbers, but that's what we're looking at, so we call it IGF. And um, what I love about this, so how I was schooled back when I was in med school, it's like, oh, IGF, when it's high, it's like pro-cancer, it's like, and oh, IGF, you got to watch for this, your cancer patients watch their IGF. And so it was sort of terrifying. This is like, and hardly anybody really took IGF. It's an expensive test. I think it's like $150. Um, I put it in my panel and really gone deep into this, whether it's dairy and exercise. But anyways, exercise, which there are different types. There's walking around the block, and there's different muscle fiber types, and they actually have a purpose and they're real. But from walking around the block to doing cardio or aerobics to doing weight resistance. So we're talking about muscle mass. Anything is better than nothing. So when somebody goes, I'm not doing it, what's the best? I go, how about you just get started and call me in a week? And if you're not starting because you didn't know what the best was, but you do need to include and or focus on weight resistance training. And so I do slow weight resistance training, which is a high intensity type. You can do different types of high intensity, but that's what I do. Um, and off days at home, we do videos for, aerobics. But that stress you have to induce it to be uncomfortable. And so that's kind of the word that's at the heart of health, if you ask me, is how willing are you to be uncomfortable? How willing are you to be uncomfortable enough to have liver, egg yolk, et cetera, whatever the thing is for that person? How willing to you? So we did our HIT coming back, and it's our first full workout since the car accident. It's like, it hurts. I mean, certain ones hurt more than others, and it's slow. You're holding the pain. So it's called time under tension. You don't go one, and you have the momentary rest, and two, three, but it's not reps. It's slow.
That's what I do. To be honest, that's what I do. I'm like, I have to do weight training. So I'll get like 2 or 3 or 4 pound weights. Oh, yeah, I'm doing weight training. But it's not that kind of weight training.
It's better than nothing. So I would I always make sure something is better than nothing. Keep going with what one's doing, and put their toe into HIT or slow resistance training, and you do get the form down, and you start low, and then you gradually, and you'll find you'll plateau probably after about 6 months, and very slowly increase, or not at all for the longest, which is fine. It's about the stress. And so you're forcing your muscles to adapt to a higher stress, and then they need a couple of days to recuperate. So muscle mass is really important. So back to the lab, it's like, so now I see these labs. I love looking at IGF because, I now have the whole age thing, and obviously, from pregnancy to all the way up to adolescence, your IGF levels, it's your growth hormone that comes down to your liver, and it triggers IGF. So it's mostly an IGF, but it is triggered by growth hormone, which is from your brain, pineal gland. And so I look at that, and so unless there is a problem with that person, which they're almost never, for me, they're not going to be seeing me if they have that kind of problem. But I can see who doesn't show up at the gym at all, or who doesn't even walk around on the block. And so you're talking to an obese person, and you go, all right, your insulin's high, your glucose high. We did another fancy test to prove it to you. We put on a CGM, and you saw that. And here's your IGF. It's actually very low for your age because it declines as we get older, but we have the power of keeping it up there. It's kind of like the vitality lab. It's the rejuvenation lab. And so as much as you go, well, too much is bad for cancer, that is such a distortion of the reality, but it has its kernel of truth, but if you do it by a natural source of exercise, you're not taking anything. You're doing something for yourself. And that will give you a 48-hour rise, a fall of it's growth hormone, but you then get a nice IGF bounce out of that, and then it goes back, and then you do it again. So exercise is part of our lifestyle forever. And so you can read that. You go to the gym much? Do you exercise much? Do you swim much? Do you do anything? Do you play tennis or paddleball? I can tell you're not a doer, are you? And that's vital because it's the thing that allows all the cells to turn over for maintenance. We're not growing anymore. We're not getting a bigger nose or fingers or anything else, but we're replacing those cells and we want them to be in good quality. So the doing of the muscle mass, when you look at somebody and they don't have to be so hypertrophy that they, are the former Schwarzenegger or somebody else. You can tell when you pat them on the back, when you shake their hand, the muscle mass of the whole body. And you know that. You can look at the head and the neck just by looking at it, what they look like, and you know that. And there's a degree of health, and we don't know their diet. So I do see people that are a lot stronger than me, that are both younger and older than me, and their diet sucks because they have this belly, but their muscle mass is probably really pretty good. And so they didn't know the other part. And who knows if they're ever, they'll probably drink their beer and they'll have their whatever, or they're in there with their energy drinks because somehow they need that, so they think. So, but they got the exercise part. So you really need to look at both, but not doing exercise and think you can get away with it. It's going to catch up with you. It's going to catch up with you.
Damn. Okay. Because I do my walking. So do you think that cardio is a waste of time if you want to live longer, reduce the risk of early death?
Well, let me answer differently. If you're saying, can I do cardio instead of weightlifting, we'll call it resistance training, I would say no. If your goal, right? So, but then I would default to something's better than nothing. Do what you think is appropriate. But no, well, I call it HIT. The resistance training, slow resistance training is vital. It's the only way you're going to get your muscle mass. But something is better than nothing. So if people are they're going to quit their cardio and never actually do something else, that's not a good step forward.
I like to say that something is better than nothing, but I don't like to default on that because if I just go for a 30-minute walk every day and I do the same thing over and over, or it could just be anything like eating the same foods or just eating, not trying to eat more liver, like for example. And if I have that mindset, something is better than nothing, I'll just keep doing the same thing. So I try to just even if it's pushing yourself a little bit, but you have to incrementally get better and better over time. Something better than nothing is good advice if somebody's just starting, but you always have to push yourself. And that's even in life. Overall, whether it be mentally, physically, emotionally, you always have to push yourself to try to get better. I know when I first started doing the interviews, like me talking to you right now, it'd be a mess. Let me just tell you. But when you push yourself to do physical exertion, emotional, mental exertion, you do get better.
What I would say, I would tie this into, we do live in a funny world right now, apart from the health thing, and it's very easy to get depressed and whatever kind of news you want to read. So what is working out giving? It really, in diet, it gives you a sense of optimism that is going to be undiminishable. And we need that. And optimism is a fancier word for hope. You need to have a kernel of hope in anything what you do, a kernel of hope in whatever the project is you're working on, even if it's cleaning your house. So it's hope and it's optimism. You got to defend that. And that's really the center of the ball of wax we're talking about. So when you work out and you're tired and you come back, you're going to find your norm has, you're not electrified, but you're optimistic. You're optimistic. And life tends with optimism is kind of fun. And with optimism is kind of curiosity. What else can I do? Why don't I ask these questions? And suddenly it becomes rich. It's not just green and the forest. It's like, well, that's pretty cool. That tree does that. That's a needle. That's a leaf. That's it. It's like suddenly it becomes the next level of questions and things that you notice. And so that's the connection and that's the value. So when we tend to tie things into mortality or lack of, extended lifespan, I would say the heart of everything that we're talking about is, I know they say the moment you live now and so on and so forth, is feeling good about this. You do want to get better at the podcasting. You do want to have not a lot of liver. You do want to, I want some of that. Don't you want to go, yeah, I got another day today. I woke up and I realized I got another day. That's it.
I love that. It's a simple things and like pushing yourself just a little bit to get a bit better, not totally uncomfortable, but when you push yourself that little, and that it's the thing from Atomic Habits, small things make a difference over time. I love all that kind of stuff. The last thing I wanted to touch upon, and this is for longevity, interestingly enough, because I always thought that uric acid was associated with gout. So how is uric acid or elevated levels of uric acid associated with early death or increase in cardiovascular disease?
That's a big question, and nothing is certain there in terms of that. But what we find, um, so the way I do it is I like to look at correlations. So you can say, well, as uric acid goes up, so uric acid is, how do we get there? You actually can get elevated uric acid from a ketogenic diet initially, and that's actually the topic I'm working on now in this video. Has to do with anion gap. It's like you're shifting over, in this particular case, since I just said that, you're shifting over from a carb metabolism, called the standard American diet, but a carb metabolism, to a fat burning metabolism. That's pretty straightforward. And it's not just flipping a switch, and you're asking your whole body, your whole metabolism, to make this transformation. It will take at least a month, more than likely 6 months, more than likely 2 years, but you'll get better. So in the shift of your body going, what the heck? Where are the donuts coming from? Or the Rice Krispies, or whatever the carbs were, we're not getting that. Well, your gut is like an assembly line. Your gut has been lined up perfectly to digest the food that you bring in. It's like the cars that are coming in, they're going to be fine-tuned, and then they're going to be sent out into the world. Well, now you've decided we're not going to be making that car anymore. We're not going to be eating that kind of food. So all that assembly line is irrelevant to the new food. So actually it has a lot to do with gut sort of adapting to fat metabolism. It's not just mitochondria and all these fancy words like biogenesis and so on and so forth. It's a long transition. And in that transition, your uric acid will go up. And in one, you could say, oh, it's about purines. It's not necessarily about purines. It's about really the mitochondria not being able to handle things. And in that transition, and for some people, they get clobbered. If they have gout, they're going to get it. So they should stay on their medications and just wade through it. And then on the other side, it's not a forever thing. On the other side, the uric acid will go down. So the dilemma is, they say, you see these, and I don't have enough studies to sort of say I have 100 people and there are hundreds, and elevated uric acid. And so I look at it like, well, if they had low uric acid, it came from purines, and it came from a poor metabolism, it came from alcohol and a lot of other things, it came from all the foods you're saying that makes, you can get it from sickness. That's where I got it. I actually had a bout of pseudo gout, but it was pretty darn close, and it's very uncomfortable, so it made me look into all of that. Is that you now have to rethink, how do I make my uric acid solvable so it doesn't show up? So if it's like, if you think of water going through a dam, and I'm going to now close the dam, the water's going to rise on the other side of the dam. Makes sense, right? Uric acid's like that. Sometimes it's not about how much uric acid to break down products of purines and so on, which is RNA, DNA, nucleic, that's where they come from, or comes from any kind of meat we eat. Some are more, but anything living has purines in it. They're the more concentrated, nutrient dense, as you will, fish like sardines versus tuna. They both have purines, more concentrated in sardines and mackerel, just the way it is. You look at that little fish, it's very concentrated. So that's not a mystery. But sometimes it's not so much the breakdown of our diet, of our eating, it's that we've made it through lifestyle less soluble. So now that water behind the dam is going to rise up. And so now we have what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, you look at lifestyle factors. And so I find, for me, and this isn't where I read about, it's like, I did a lot of reading of uric acid papers, and it's fascinating because it also goes back to history. It goes back to evolution. Why did we lose the ability to make our own vitamin C when we became to the great apes, and then from there to humans? Why did we partially get the ability to digest fructose? Fructose is part of it. It's not the only culprit. So we tend to go, oh, it's a fructose story. Well, it's hard not to be technical there, because our diet today is high fructose. Fructose is in really everything. We've never had fructose by itself. It's always been coupled with another sugar. And so it's when it breaks down, we get the fructose. But now, if you go to your Starbucks or whatnot, you actually can do fructose there as a little separate packet, and that's pretty intense. And you have fructose, and it's these, the fancy word is polyols. And So you have your yeah, sugar alcohols, but not all sugar alcohols. Certainly, in fact, so they call it the polyol pathway, or another name for it is called the sorbitol pathway. And you go, wait a minute, isn't sorbitol, what about the mannose? What about all these others? Well, they are all varying degrees of a problem. But when you have a pathway named after sorbitol and fructose, and glucose also. So when you load up one side of it, you're having a lot of donuts. That would be the glucose. Glucose still gets broken down. Or you're having a lot of, I wouldn't say just fruits. Fruits are not, they're culpable because they're high fructose, but they're not just fructose in there. And but if they just had all fruits, they would have a lot of that. That's going to load the pathway, and even too much glucose gets converted by our body into fructose. So the ultimate culprit is fructose, but it didn't start off that way. So it's kind of a vague story of, yeah, at this point, going into the whole polyol and into the uric acid as a contributory to elevated uric acid is a problem. So on the dietary side of things, it's back to, oh, the sweetener things. And some people go, oh, don't have fructose because don't have fruit because it has fructose in it. It's like, if you do real fruits, we happen to move to a place that actually had a peach tree, and it bloomed and it had 200 pounds of peaches. And so we cut them all up and froze them, and it's like they were delicious. And we haven't eaten all of them. But obviously, it's not part of carnivore. Obviously, and it certainly wasn't kind of the peach they had 200,000 years ago, if they even existed, any more than a berry. But they were delicious, didn't have a problem with me. I thought it possibly could have. Um, and so what I come down to are, in terms of solubility issue, are really three things that are not talked much about. Make sure your vitamin D levels are up there. It clearly is a correlation. Vitamin C is also a big deal. It helps the solubility of your uric acid, so it goes out with your urine, so it doesn't pile up in your serum. I like what they call liposomal vitamin C, which means it doesn't have to be digested. It actually gets absorbed. Very cool, very cool. And then in terms of magnesium, and minerals in general, but magnesium, I do a calcium magnesium to have, and there's a lot of forms. You can have oxalate, you can have glycinate, you can have malate, and so on and so forth. Um, I like the form citrate from citric acid because it fits right into the citric acid cycle. Who cares? But the fact that it helps with the solubility of your uric acid. So for me, I think I've never had a bout again because of the vitamin C, the citrate that I take, um, and periodic fruits. In terms of, you go, well, how would that be helpful? I think that we have the ability to digest fructose a little bit, and so there's my fructose part. I'm not starving myself from fructose. Hardly, I haven't had a peach for a while. Um, and it just realized they were like they're smashingly great. Um, that's where I am on that. Others, if they have a lot of alcohol, same thing. It's going to flood that pathway. If they have a lot of meats, purines, so there's many ways to fill the funnel on that side. If one is so, and actually high intensity exercise. So what I've just told you to do is contributory. I had to look at all the factors. Why is it contributory? Because for me to get bigger muscle masses, to hypertrophy, I have to break down my muscles. I've just broken down a lot of purines. And so now that's going to spill out into my blood system, right? And it has to be filtered out. So high intensity training, generally, but weight resistance, high intensity training, think of all the bodybuilders, when they do a hard workout, you go measure it, and they actually will show up in another thing called rhabdomyolysis, which is a bit extreme, but anybody can get there relative to their ability to handle that. So you have that, you have how much meat to eat. You go, well, wait a minute, so it's anti-carnivore? You could go in that direction. I had to question these too. It's like, well, I'm here. Which part of the pain do I not want? Um, I am carnivore, and I think I at least eat probably around 2 grams of protein, the animal whole food sources of protein per day on any given day per ideal body weight, which is your height and weight. No mystery there. You can look that up in Google, ideal body weight, and they're all ballpark about the same. So I think I've managed to get around it with the things that I've mentioned. Of course, I have my fish oils. That's helpful as well. There's some good research on that. But so I make sure. So I have my vitamin C a little bit. I have my citrate or even citric acid if you want to do that's the other thing you get with fruits, by the way, is citric acid. Um, and the vitamin D, these basic things have really allowed me to have a good lifestyle with these other things. So it actually would have been a anti-carnivore diet recommendation if one has gout, and there's ways to get around it that do make me think that it existed in evolution. Where did citric acid exist in evolution? Well, it came through the fruits. The idea was that we were all great apes or pre-great apes. We ate the rotting fruits in the ground, and fructose was toxic, so we didn't do that. But we also made our own vitamin C at the time. We got over the toxicity of fructose a little bit. Can't have a lot of it, a little bit. At the same time, we stopped making our vitamin C. What a coincidence. This sort of points to fruit. And they're probably all berries at the time.
Yeah, it's not the extremes that it's not the extremes of the amount of sugar or even the sweetness of the fruit. So even when I was watching your videos about gout or uric acid, and it made sense because you don't have to be 100% carnivore 100% of the time. It's just these things, the same thing that you were saying earlier before the interview, that we're hearing certain things about this diet or this trend, and basically what they're trying to do is sell something or programs or whatever. But even, to say that you have to be 100% this or that, no fruit, no, like, it doesn't make sense, because if you were to have fruit in the wild, then you would have the fruit. Nowhere, it would be nowhere near as sweet as what would have these days, or in the frequency. So I get that. But then I was thinking, wow, like, the protocol to lower your uric acid is so opposite from everything else, which is, and then it was a bit confusing because on one hand, it's like, well, if you have high uric acid, you could get gout, heart disease, die. And then the other part of it is, well, exercise and eat more meat, omega-3s, and have high cholesterol, and you're going to live longer. So I was like, oh, what's the answer?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And so once you start there, at least for me, I start saying, all right, what are some of the correlations I find in labs for, and so one of the things that's an easy is hemoglobin. Where do you get hemoglobin? Red meats, right? Animals. And you go, wait a minute, that's another strike against carnivore. But it's only when you have excessive amounts. So, I mean, that's the thing about people. They go, oh, this thing solves, let's say they just heard liposomal vitamin C. They're going to have a shovelful per day of liposomal vitamin C because they don't like their uric acid. That's way over the top. It's basically going to work really well for people who are probably very deficient in vitamin C or borderline deficient. And so when it came down to hemoglobin, I go, and this is whether we're measuring red blood cells, whether we're measuring, what else we got here? I'm sort of looking at my scatter plots. Um, hemoglobin directly. And so it goes flat and it pops up. And so it says that enough is good, too much is bad. Now, where do we hear that? That's about everything. It's a truism of life. Enough is good. You need, and so there you go. That's, I find that I was expecting, some other correlations. One thing was really neat is that glutathione and uric acid are kind of opposite in the sense that as your uric acid goes up, your glutathione goes down. That not always, there's kind of exceptions. This is just sort of my average of the people that I work with, but that sort of says that one's a driver of the other, or one is using something up, of the other. So it's not like, oh, cause and effect. And what else are there? Yeah. And then I was expecting inflammation and uric acid to be like 1 and 1, and it's not. It's not always the case. So when you look at relative to diets, it's like, oh, it's some common sense thing. So, if one ate a lot of liver, and a lot of people are against liver, not because they don't like the taste of it, it's because, oh, look at all the liver problems. But, you're going to have people who have really loved liver have problems. Well, they ate too much. I mean, there's something, that's the thing about it. You go, how about not too much and a little bit? How about not too much and a little bit? And that's kind of being reasonable. It's a degree of common sense, but it's not marketed. That's not a good marketing jingoistic thing to say.
I love that you said that. Well, I think that we've spoken about a lot, to help people, reverse as much as possible their disease and live longer as much as you can.
Two things I wanted to add to that. I would say my biggest selling point for themselves is like, wouldn't you like to be more optimistic today? I mean, how do you counter all that? It almost seems like it's coming over the mountaintops. It's like this cloud coming in. Push it back. You're going to be one of the vital people in our culture and in your own life. Is like, grab it. This is doable, because I think it's so necessary if for no other reason than that.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say a big thank you. How can people find more of you apart from your wonderful YouTube, which I'm going to put in the show notes?
That's great. I would say that so on the back of our YouTube, in the details, if they really need to send me an email or so on, and the people I work with, so a lot of people go, oh, I wanna work with you. That's fine. Generally, it's pretty expensive, only because I'm now at the point I go, I want to do these labs. This is what I'm interested in, and this is what helps people. I'm no longer the tweaker. I would say work with a regular doctor. I'm not trying to dismiss it. My wife's not here. She would probably kill me for saying this. She's like, no, tell people to come to you. It's like not everybody wants to do all these labs, and I get that. So, it, if the grain of learning can be dropped into your mouth and you start to move on something, let that be the beginning, learning little labs. You don't need to work with me to get all this other stuff. I like it. It really has revealed a lot. I came from a dire situation that I needed to know more about. So there you go. Hope that helps.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure we're going to see you very soon.
It was an earful. Okay. Take care, kiddo. It's good talking to you. Thank you. Hearing you.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Goldkamp, all about how to live longer and reverse disease. Now, you need to watch this video next with Dr. Ovadia. He's going to talk about how you can reduce the risk of heart disease and what foods you need to prioritize to reduce the risk of a heart attack. I'll see you guys next week.